Okay, this is our second part in the series of working with FormIt in terms of developing site data. And what we're going to do from here is start the process of using this FormIt file to generate some data in Revit, specifically topography lines and scale drawings. And then we're also going to start pushing and merging some FormIt and Revit things together into Twinmotion for visualization. So this is where we left off. We have our site someplace in Himalayas. Thank you, second year. Awesome choice. And we have a small little object right here that's starting to represent a placeholder for the building. So let's identify this first as a building element, not in anything other than name. Just so we can start separating some layers here to make organizing things in Revit easier. So to do that, I'm going to create a new layer. So I've got my Layers tab open, and again, that can be found under Windows and Layers right here if you're not seeing that on screen. I'm just going to hit the plus button. We will double click on layer 1 and let's just call it building for right now. From there, nothing is assigned to that layer. There's no objects on it yet. I need to tell objects to live on that layer. So I'm just going to use my left mouse, drag a window over my object, and that has got everything selected then. And under that object's properties, again, same trick. If you're not seeing properties panel right here, you can go window and properties and just turn that on. Under my window and properties, you'll notice there's some nice bits of information there. The object's name, which I didn't give it a name, so it's just the default name there. Note it's not seeing itself as a building yet. Total awareness is 0 square feet, but it will give you volume. There are some steps I need to go through to define that as a building. We'll get to that in another episode. But for right now, I just want to go ahead and put that onto the building layer. And I can double check that that's on the building layer. Let's deselect it here just by unchecking the Show Hide button underneath layers. Okay, so now I have 3 layers: satellite image, which is what's on my screen right here, terrain, which is the topography model, and building. And what I want in Revit specifically is this terrain model, right? Because I want topography. Right now, this is nice to have, but it doesn't really give me the data that I'm looking for in terms of topo lines. So let's turn off a few things. I'm going to turn off my building layer. I'm going to turn off my satellite imagery layer. So just for a good purpose, those things are hidden. Also, underneath this is the Show in Revit tab. I'm not really going to push the data into Revit. This is more of a import process that I typically use. But just for good measure, I'm going to turn off those 2 things as well. Okay, so I've got only my terrain selected. That's the only 3D object that's going to be sent. So right now I'm just going to do a file, save sketch as locally, and let's just save this site 1 arc222. And I'm just going to put a suffix on there as topo. So inside of Revit, I'm going to start a new file. I'm going to, as always, use the architectural template and say OK. If this is your first time into Revit, just some quick navigation things. I'm in plan view, so I'm in an orthographic view. So there's no orbit in a plan view, but I can use my wheel to zoom in and out. I can hold down my wheel to pan. I can double click on these other locations from the default view. Level 2, ceiling plans, which are the same thing as the floor plans, but looking up, and my different elevations. I can also come to right here, the house at the top, to create an axonometric or orthographic 3-dimensional projection as well. Okay, so I have all of those things. In that view, I still have zoom in and out with the wheel. I can hold the middle mouse button to pan, and then I can shift and middle mouse to orbit. Or I should say the wheel on the mouse to orbit. Cool, so that's your quick Revit navigation lesson there. What I need to do next is I'm going to insert this CAD model coming from FormIt. So I'm going to go insert CAD. I'm going to change this drop-down list to format files.axm. and I'm going to select the file that I just saved a second ago from FormIt. So site1 arc222-topo, open. So that's going to give me this huge file. I mean, it's not a huge file, it's a large site is what I should say. File size is somewhat indifferent. So from here, I want the topography lines, right? So to grab those topo lines, that's going to be underneath massing and site. We are going to generate a new topo surface from an import. So I'm going to left click, create from imported instance. I'm going to select my object. I'm going to leave both of those checked by default and say OK. And so what this is going to do, this is going to put a point, a node in space at every intersection of the model that was imported. If you'll notice, it's not going to give me lines, topography lines, through the points because the points are typically odd numbers. 69 feet, 3 and 11/32 of an inch. If I go on up here, let's just select another random point. That should be closer to an even number. 116 feet, 11/47, 256. So those are not specific heights. Those are simply where the vertices of the model that I imported exist. So it's putting a node at each one of those. The topo lines then are defined as exact heights sliced through that model. Knowing that, it's important to say, okay, it also grabbed these 4 points on the bottom of that FormIt model, right? So that's these 4 points right here. And really, to help Revit resolve this, I definitely need to come in really quickly and delete each one of those points. It's just going to help my topo map behave a little bit better. Don't think it gave me one right there, actually. It doesn't look like it did. So now I only have points selected across the top surface. From that, I can green checky box and say, okay, I'm going to accept that. And now, for the most part, I'm totally cool with just unpinning. So right now, the object that I imported has a pin in it. That means no touch, essentially. Until I unpin it, then I can delete it. And what I'm left with is this very dense topo line mesh that is now an editable surface of topography in Revit. So something I can start doing grading work and redefining the topography on. Let's take a quick look at that in the site plan view, just to go over a few things. First, you'll notice I am cutting a section through the site, and that should be somewhere around, I believe, the 40-foot mark, if I recall. And that is simply because, again, in Revit, every view that I have is a section view, and my site plan view is not high enough to see down through the entire site. So if you're seeing something like this, it means essentially that my view plane for this plan view, the site plan view, is cutting off a portion of the site. And so I need to essentially raise the camera up that's creating that view. So to make that happen, I'm going to make sure nothing is selected. If nothing is selected in Revit, my properties panel right here is the properties for my view. So I'm going to scroll down to view range and click edit. From my view range, oh no, it's not 40 feet. I am 200 feet. So the default clipping plane for that site plan is 200 feet. It needs to go way up from that. Let's at least double that. We're going to change that to 500 feet, 500 feet, and say apply. That should get all of my topography in, and now I can say okay. So now my view is essentially above the entire site. Right, so next, something that is this steep, it's fairly ridiculous to have topo lines at every foot. So let's change that to a topo line at every 10 feet. So to do that, right here, this is a little bit of a hidden thing inside of Revit, but you'll see them everywhere. There's these little drop-down lists. And that means, more options available, essentially, is what you want to think of when you see this little bitty downward-facing arrow. So I'm going to click on that, and that expands my properties. So if you'll notice right here, it's going to start drawing topo lines at 0. It's going to stop at 1,000 and do so in a 1-foot increment. If I change that to 10 feet, this is just going to make this a much cleaner drawing to read. So now I've got topo lines at every 10 feet, to remind me that they're every 10 feet, I am certainly going to label my contours. So let's just run a label right through there. So you can see now all my contours are labeled from, what's my high point? 500 feet, 490, all the way down to 10 feet, down to essentially that corner, which would be 0. If I need to show those numbers to show larger, which I probably do, let's change the scale of this drawing to about a 1 to 50. Much more legible now. Again, it's not changing anything here. It's merely changing how my data is going to read. Things like symbols for elevation, numbers, that's really all that's changing. It is not changing the size of this geometry. This is all at 1-to-1 scale. In other words, if I dimension this, edge to edge, we are 900 by 900 feet, approximately. Okay? So from here, this is a file that I'm ready to push into Twinmotion. As well as this file from Twinmotion. But let's do one more thing in Revit, and that is let's get that satellite photograph as an underlay on here, because I really have absolutely no idea in relationship to the topography lines where my site is. And as I move forward in Revit, I'm definitely going to need that. So that is where we're going to start the exact next video.